Hi, Steve.
Hi, Jim.
There's such a thing as prog rock, but there's no such thing as con rock.
Hmm. Why don't we just keep politics out of this?
Good call.
And welcome back to Two Guys Talking About Records, that exciting broadcast where we just talk about records, and that's about it. But that's why you're here. You're not here to hear the other stuff. So,
Nope.
we keep it simple. Jim and I are simple guys. So,
All right.
I am Steve. I am a record collector.
And
And
my name is Jim, and I own a record store, but have been known to collect. And I got some goodies this week that really only a collector would want.
oh Lord, oh boy. Well, I think mine are more. Well, no, they're actually one of them might give you a little fits to try to find, Jim.
Oh, great. Great. So today on the podcast, Steve and I are going to venture into, let's say, uncomfortable territory.
Hmm. Yeah.
I know what I like,
Yeah.
and apparently I am a prog rock fan and collector. I just never really thought of it like that.
I think I,
Progressive rock, isn't it?
I think I must be too when I look at this.
It's just a couple of episodes ago you said progressive rock, prog rock. No, I don't like that stuff. And like, oh, maybe you
What
do.
Jim, it really came to a head when I had this album from a group called UK, which is considered one of the top 20 prog albums. I
Yeah,
listen to it and I go, I don't really like that. And man, the big comments come in. What? I
I
returned
saw
it.
that. Oh no. Oh
Well,
no.
the thing is, in Discogs is like a $6, medium value. They charge $19.99. Forget that. I'm not paying that
Ouch.
for a prog album.
Okay. Well, we're going to delve deeper into the genre of prog and then maybe branch off into subgenres because this is confusing.
It is. I
That's the
I
best way
still
to
don't
put
get.
it.
I don't understand it, man.
All right. Well, we'll get to that in just a couple of moments. But as this is the Vinyl Community Podcast, each week we talk about the pickups and additions to our collection, which as of last week, apparently you can't have too many records, is what we determined, right?
Yes, I think so. As you can try not to, but it just doesn't seem to work
It
out.
doesn't work. So, what do you got this week, sir?
All right. I had this come in. It was Galaxy 500 uncollected, which it's yeah, just stuff from Galaxy 500 that I guess was so crappy it didn't make it to an album.
But you
Isn't that
collected it.
Isn't that how you explain that kind of stuff? It's just outtakes, things that didn't get into their albums, things they did in the studio. It's just a cool collection of more Galaxy 500 for those that want to be a completist on Galaxy 500. I don't really think I want to be, but there it was. I bought it. So,
Stranger
yeah.
things have happened.
Yep. So we got that one. This was, I showed a Long Riders last week, their very first
Yep.
full length Long Riders. I went back in Discogs, and here's their EP that came out. This has one of the great Paisley Underground songs, "And She Rides," which is just one of my favorite from the Paisley Underground. And it really made me think about this group. Wow, it's a Paisley Underground group. And when I bought that first album the very first time, I go, well, that's like country rock. What the
Yep.
hell?
Oh, yeah.
No idea. But it's still very much a country rock leaning, but As She Rises is a Paisley Underground classic. So I just thought, man, I need to get this because I've never had it, and I've never had that song that I really love. So,
Hmm.
yeah. But
You found her.
yeah. And this was one of a guy from one of my watchers of my YouTube channel recommended this out of England. Lords of the Dark Sky. The name of the group is Outskirts of Infinity. Look at that.
Looks wild.
Does that look like Prague or something? I don't know. This is psychedelic 80s rock. One of the guys on here is is Beavis Fran.
Oh,
Nick
wow.
Steinman. He plays bass on this. This is so stinking cool. It is great. So, Lord of the Dark Skies by Outskirts of Infinity. I have another album I ordered from these folks out of the UK. Obviously, they didn't make it big in the US, I guess.
Hmm.
Off Wazoo Records. Yeah, I, I I'm in love with this album. So
Very cool.
that was my pickups this week. And you?
And me, well, you know what? Just a couple of weeks back, I was raving about that new David Gilmour and how I thought it was just a beautiful album. I think you've got one on the way too,
I do. You better
actually.
not have changed your mind because I bought
No,
it because of your review.
no, I have not changed my mind, but this, it just happens to be pushed to the background now because of another new release from this week that I am absolutely enamored with, and that's the new Billy Strings and Highway Prayers. This is such a good album. And again, I'm still, I guess, considered in my infancy in the modern bluegrass genre. I've got a couple of other Billy Strings albums. Home is a great album. That one won a Grammy. This one is on par with the album Home. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Steve, and predict that Highway Prayers will win Billy Strings another Grammy next time around. I think
Okay.
this is, it's hard to explain. It's bluegrass, but it's got more of that modern feel to it, which is what Billy Strings I think is really really pushing for and doing well. With the likes of these more modern, like a Jerry Douglas, in some cases, a lot of these other Molly Tuttle and the like. But his sound is just it's very pure and it's emotional. I think is the best way to put this.
Mhm.
In looking at, I watched some stuff on his YouTube channel. We'll call this up here in a second or two, looking through some of the comments on his videos on the YouTube channel. This is people saying quite literally he has saved their lives. And Billy String's backstory is it's a tremendously, I want to say it's sad, but it's not in that case because he has overcome so much. He overcame parents with drug addictions and his own addictions at an early age, leaving home at the age of 13, and music literally saved his life. It drew him out of those addictions and gave him meaning and purpose. And he is almost in a way, I think, paying it forward with his music to people that suffer through the same type of afflictions. And there is no shortage of fans commenting in his videos, at least on the YouTube side, just expressing that gratitude, that love, saying, "Your music pulled me back from the brink. Your music gave me the courage to pull out of the downward spiral that I was in. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I'm not being melodramatic. There are literally people saying that in there, and I think that this album goes a long way to really express that. Home did as well, and he had a couple of others in the interim. One where he paid homage to his stepfather, who also overcame addiction but taught him how to play guitar and banjo and really gave him a love of music. But this, I think, is something else. And when this was announced, let me call up just a little zoom in here. When this was announced as a double LP, I remember on our new release show, some very cool artwork on the
Yeah,
inside as
yeah.
well.
Love it.
Um, it was listed as a list price of around $50, and I remember squawking a little bit about that because we had talked about, the price of vinyl getting out of control. I think that I have been almost jaded in a way by a lot of artists who pull out double LPs that don't need to be. We've talked about that, just so they could charge an extra or maybe
Yep.
say audiophile quality because we're spreading the grooves out. This sucker clocks in at about 115 minutes. It is chock full of music, and it uses pretty much every inch of the two LPs that it's on. This one, by the way, is on a very cool looking, let's see, in the exclusive. So it's no slouch when it comes to content on there. And it's, I just think it's a fun album. And it is not quite a concept album. It's not really, I don't think, telling an overarching story as much as it is a thematic album. And the themes prevalent throughout this are driving in his car and traveling and how that journey of traveling mirrors the journey of his life. I'm getting a little deep here, I realize, but That's kind of what I'm reading into this. Now, adding to this and to that theme, the lyric insert sheet that was given out or that came with this is in the form of one of those old 70s car manuals that you would
Yeah.
get when you'd buy, a Chevelle or a Pontiac or something like that. And all of the lyrics to the songs and the liner notes are in this little car manual, which I think really adds to the cool
So
factor of this.
so Jim, is it progress?
No, I don't believe so. No, it's jamming though. The other thing that I think is really cool about this, Steve, is that Billy Strings really begins to embrace, and I think more than he has in other spots, his Michigan roots. There are a couple of songs on here that reference Traverse City. They're in the lyrics, but there's also a couple of instrumentals on here, just real good instrumental, and not that typical bluegrass instrumental that's about a minute and a half long. These are well structured, thought out, lengthy instrumentals in the 3 minute range. One of them is called Escanaba, and that is a town. You know, I lived up in Upper Michigan
Yep.
for quite some time in the UP of Michigan. It's a very cool one. The other one is an instrumental, also called Sini Stretch. And you want to talk about way inside and just a way inside uh, kind of obscure reference. The Sini Stretch is a stretch of U.S. Highway or Michigan Highway 28, which this particular section runs from the town of Sini, which is in the eastern UP, towards Munising. And it's just a great instrumental song that pays homage to this stretch of road in the middle of the UP that you could drive around and not even realize it's called the Sini Stretch. So
Huh.
this album for me, I think, is great. It's going to be on my year-end list coming up here in a couple of months, and I'll repeat my prediction on this, Steve. I think that this is going to win him another Grammy. Billy Strings' Highway Prayers is just a phenomenal album.
Okay.
So I spent up all of my pickup time talking about that. So very quickly, I'll say that I've upgraded my copy of Rare Earth. Speaking of Michigan bands, their album "Get Ready." This one from 1969 originally, and it's a die cut cover, which is kind of cool. I had the
Yeah.
other cover on here. The vinyl's a little beat up on this, but I decided to up it for. I had a 1969, but it was the full outside, not the die cut side.
That's neat.
Otherwise, that jazz collection that I went through, I
Yeah.
mentioned, I was in the process of going through. Picked up a copy of Krupa and Rich, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, one of their battle albums. Some great jumping jazz, heavy on the percussion side. I'm an old high school era drummer, so this is just a cool addition. I've got some other Buddy Rich stuff, and I've got I think one other Gene Krupa album. But this has got the likes other musicians appearing with them include Oscar Peterson, Dizzy Gillespie is on here, Roy Eldridge, Herb Ellis, and it's a rockin', if you can call it that, just a jumpin'. I think we'll say
Yeah.
jumpin'. And then finally, I took some heat at home for this, but I could not pass it up. This is an album called it's from an artist by the name of Nick Lucas, and it's Painting the Clouds with Sunshine. This is a 1950, yeah, let me see my notes here, 1958 album. But Lucas was actually a crooner, a troubadour, singing troubadour in the 1920s and 1930s. Most of his other stuff was on the 10 and 12-inch shellac 78s, made to be played in that fashion, and including this song, Painting the Clouds with Sunshine. So this, I believe, was either a compilation put together in 1958, and I can't quite tell if it's the original versions of his songs or if they re-recorded them in the 50s, because he lived well, I think, into the 70s or 80s before passing away. He was born in the late 1800s, and it's every bit as schlocky and just kind of la 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 thing. He also, by the way, was the first one, and it's on this compilation. He was the first one to record "Tiptoe Through the Tulips."
Oh boy.
And it's on here. That was written by Joe Burke and Al Dubin, who also wrote the Painting the Clouds with Sunshine. But yeah, Nick Lucas was the first one to record, one of the first, I believe, to record "Tiptoe Through the Tulips" with me. Well before Tiny Tim freaked us out with it.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Boy. There's
So,
no doubt his version's better because Tiny Tim's is like, it
and
still scares me.
I don't know why I added this to my collection, just possibly because it's such a goofy looking cover and it's music that I'll listen to once and bring out, hey, you got to check out this real hokey song called Painting the Clouds with Sunshine.
I think we talked about that issue too on our I Made Too Many Records.
Yes, we did. But
Oh
I'm going to
boy,
take that, some Monday morning when Kim's getting ready to go to work and it's my day off and she's just starting her first cup of coffee, I'll throw that on the table.
way to go.
Then I'll spend the rest of the day outside working in the yard.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that is the pickups every week, by the way, and I'll do my best to find some of these. We put together a Spotify playlist so you can hear samples of some of these. I do recommend too that if you head to YouTube to look for that Billy Strings album and the lyric movie of it. It's a great watch. Sit down, relax, but be prepared to be tripped out a little bit because the animations on that are just out of this world. So
Yeah.
animations, by the way, Steve, that remind me of, I don't know, say progressive rock albums from time to time. That was also trippy, wasn't it?
Well, it kind of was. It was kind of taking music that had a certain song structure that was everybody doing the same thing, saying, you know what, drugs. and, and then, but not just that. It's just, I think to me, a lot of young classically trained musicians were interested in trying to get into playing music.
Yep.
And then, so come on, especially in the UK, because Prague really was a UK phenomena. And so there was this opportunity to come in and take what I know with classical and marry it with rock.
Progressive rock, as we mentioned at the top of the show, is really kind of a tough one to pin down. As
Mhm.
with, I think, just about any genre of music these days, you can break it down into numerous subgenres.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier several years ago when you had rock and heavy metal or hard rock, whatever the case. But now I think we have the propensity to try to break these things down to try to more deeply classify them. So, and I think Discogs is both at fault and to thank for this. It's the fact that they allow you to call things whatever you want to call them. But progressive rock on its own, as I said before, it can be kind of confusing if you're really starting to look into it.
It is. There's, there's, the prog rock, there's prog pop, there's prog metal, there is prog soul, there is, what was that? I found post progressive. So, I mean,
Wow.
neo prog is out there. There's space rock, there's heavy metal, black metal, which has extreme leanings into prog.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of
Oh, you
mind
forgot you forgot jazz fusion, prog jazz
Jazz
fusion.
fusion, yes, exactly.
In looking through, while prepping for this episode, I dug through my collection. I know you did too, and I was astounded to say, okay, well, I've got the biggies, but then I'm thinking, well, these are considered prog. I didn't quite consider that.
Yeah,
But in prepping for this, one of I think the albums or groups that I think sit atop this progressive music ladder is Yes. And Close
mhm,
to the Edge, I think, is an album that appeared on a lot of the compilation lists
yeah,
of top prog albums that are out there. And, I've had this in my collection for quite some time, and it's a 1972 album. And I think you've got a copy of the 1971 as well with Fragile. Oh, wow, you've got the MoFi Fragile in there
I
too.
bought this at Radio Wasteland Records.
I
Look,
remember
it's
this.
sealed.
Oh, no, you haven't
Now,
kicked it.
I do have another, from the flood, I have my playable copy in vinyl I've been playing. So
Okay.
but yeah.
So you have that, but I think your opening salvo there, talking about classically trained musicians finding that foray, is very very evident in the group. Yes,
Yeah.
they brought that symphonic, and that's the other one of the other subgenres that we get in prog rock is symphonic rock.
Hmm.
And for me, that's where it starts to branch. Okay, well, symphonic rock could refer to anything that brings in an orchestra or orchestral elements into the album.
Yeah.
Does that still make it prog? Well, in the case of Yes, the answer is, well, yes,
Yeah. Yes. But
yes.
this time is my favorite Yes album, which is probably makes most prog people cringe because it was their most pop oriented album. And
Yep.
to me, radio friendly, accessible. I mean, the other Yes was big on FM radio, but I didn't grow up with FM radio. That wasn't part of my life. So, but this came out, I go, wow, it was, the owner of a lonely heart. But
Yep.
is it still prog?
Because it's yes, I think the answer to that is yes, and I
Yeah.
agree that it would probably drive some real prog fans a little bit, frustrate them to say that.
Yeah.
But Yes is one of those groups that's been around for decades, so they had that not only ability, but in some cases it was necessary for them to adapt and change with the changing consuming habits of radio listeners.
Mhm.
FM radio really opened the door for a lot of different music that got away from AM. But in the end of the game, FM radio, and this is speaking from somebody who's worked it through a good portion of my life, is a commercial venture. And so the idea that even though FM could take more chances than AM in the late 60s and early 70s, it still had to earn a living for its owners and for its jocks and for the salespeople going through there. So that necessitated the idea that you still have to have some sort of commercial element. Now, one thing I want to mention in that vein is that prog rock of the late 60s, early 70s was not tremendously commercial radio friendly, meaning that you'd get these long opus records, ones that
Yeah.
were taking up an entire
Mhm.
side, 15 to 20 minutes, and you could not do that on radio. Early FM, you could get away with it, but as that became more commercialized, the necessity to say, okay, we cannot play a 30-minute side of an album and still maintain viability as a commercial station. You mentioned Emerson. So one of the other good prog albums in my collection is Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Tarkus from 1971. This is an interesting one, though. It's a promotional copy, and you know how I dig promotional copies. It's a white label promo as well. So I do have the white label promo of Tarkus coming in here. But what makes this different than the regular version of Tarkus is that this is specially banded, and you're not going to be able to see it in the video here. Let me try, though, if I can zoom it in. It has bands on there, unlike the regular commercial version of this album, meaning that this is banded for radio airplay so that the programmers and the jocks could say, okay, there's a natural, not a natural, but there's a fade at the end of this song. There's a break which allows you to mix in and out. Prior to that, and I've done this on the radio when I've done live radio with vinyl with turntables before, and if you were trying to get out of an album like this or a song like this, you're doing manual fades, and it didn't always work right. So there were specially banded for radio airplay versions of prog albums out there.
Yeah.
Very collectible, obviously, because there are not that many made of them. But that helped make prog, I think, a little bit more radio friendly in the 70s.
Sure. Well, yeah, and the other, was you talking about radio, like UK prog was big, started in the mid 60s into the early 70s, really big. And I think one of the main reasons why is John Peel. John Peel
Yep.
embraced it, and his show, you could play 30 minutes. It wasn't about just a 3-minute song or a 4-minute song. US radio, that was our format. That's how you did it. But Peel and he was the most listened to show. And so he'd be playing this stuff and everyone was getting hooked on it. But we didn't have that.
We didn't. But that's also, I think, why you have a lot of UK bands of that era that really embraced the prog movement, because that
Exactly.
was probably more commercially successful with them.
Yes.
So you get things like, I'm going to go through my list, things like the Moody Blues. This is a toughie because it's psychedelic rock, or is it prog rock, or is it symphonic rock? And I think that depending upon the album is where you go with that classification. In Search of the Lost Chord is technically psychedelic rock, but I really feel it has that prog feel to it.
It's I've struggled with Moody Blues. I just the symphonic aspects of it, it gets slow. The poetry readings, I just, it's
Yes.
like, and because I struggle with it, I got 2 MoFis. Now, that's
The
because,
struggle is real.
yeah. How about that for making great sense? Gee, Steve, I really don't like the Moody Blues, so I'll buy 2 MoFis of it instead. I got it for a good deal from Barry, and
Oh,
so
wow. Okay.
uh, but I just, it had Nights in White Satin. This has some hit on here too. I don't play them, but they sure sound good when I do.
They sound good when you do. And and I think you've teased me about this. I've got a fairly extensive Moody Blues collection. I'm not a completist with their later, their 80s-ish pop stuff, but
Uh-huh.
most of their early stuff I've got, and when I listen to it, I enjoy it. I just, like you, I don't go to it often,
Yeah.
with the exception of Lost Chord. For some reason, I gravitate to that one a lot. And
Well,
one of the
I
other,
just showed you my complete Moody Blues discography.
in two hands, you're right there. Well, I'll go that direction with my entire King Crimson discography, which consists of Court of the Crimson King and Wake of Poseidon. There you go. um, this borderline, I mean, they still call it prog rock, but this goes so far into the experimental, free, almost free jazz type movement that it
Yeah.
loses me from time to time. And I know maybe I'm just not as sophisticated as I should be to get King Crimson the way that I should. But, and I think we've talked about this before, where I love side one of Court of the
Mhm.
Crimson King, and side two, I was like, well, that's going to hardly ever be played. And the same thing with Wake of Poseidon for me, not so much a prog. I think that this is some of the early leanings of heavy metal on this one. That's just my take on Poseidon.
One that I never thought of as prog, but it's considered super prog, is Jethro Tull. And now there are a couple albums, I would say. Passion Play. Passion Play, very much leaning to that orchestration. In fact, it was done with a live orchestra. Prog really enjoyed live orchestra. Of course, Metallica
Yeah.
did a great job with it, but it was a big part of it. And, this definitely has it. It's one of my least favorite Jethro Tull albums. I rarely will put that on. I did just play it, though, before this. And, of course, they had, yes, this, which was their joke, because they kept saying Aqualung's prog. And they go, no, it's a rock album. And, I have the Aqualung, and I don't think of it as
Yes, you
prog.
are.
I guess it's because it's a concept album. So does
Yes.
a concept album make it prog, though it doesn't sound like the other prog? I get really confused in that aspect of it. But,
The other side of this too is that you could say that Ian Anderson's embrace of the flute as a rock instrument
yeah.
brings that orchestral element into this, even though I don't really consider, with the exception of Passion Play, and I think there's maybe one or two others, I don't consider Jethro Tull to be a symphonic type of group,
No.
despite the fact that he's got a woodwind
Yeah.
for the majority of each of the albums.
And he only has that. He didn't know how to play flute. It's he was a guitar player, but they already had a guitar player in the band. He goes, well, I need another instrument. I'll play the flute. You know how? No, but so
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, but you get an album like this, the very first Jethro Tull. This is pure British blues. This is so much blues, and so I've just never to say Tull is prog. I find Tull more rock than prog, personally.
I agree with you completely on that. Yet again, we're going to struggle with those classifications.
Yeah.
One of the other groups that gives me fits, two groups actually, and you know exactly where I'm going with this, don't you? See, let's start off with Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Pink Floyd is a prog group, but for some reason I cannot, for whatever reason, embrace that title for them. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they started off with blues in the Syd Barrett era, and then they got super psychedelic at the end of the Syd Barrett era, and as you go through metal and the like. But by the time they start getting to Adam Hart and Wish You Were Here, there are prog elements. There are some symphonic elements in through here, but there's synthesizer elements in there. So I can't call it psychedelic rock beyond their first four albums. So where do you go? The only other place to go is to say, okay, Wish You Were Here and quite famously Dark Side of the Moon come in as prog rock albums.
Yeah. Concept. There was a concept.
Prog rock. Yep.
Yeah, and so it throws in it. But Adam Hart Mother, I mean, this is symphonic, okay?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I totally get that on here. Yeah, Prog. Of course, it doesn't make the top 50, but Animals does. Wish You Were Here, The Wall, Dark
Yep.
Side of the Moon. I mean, because it's a concept, but that's to say any kind of concept album is Prog, and it makes no sense to me, quite honestly.
That makes it tough, and Floyd did work with soundtracks with the like of Moore and
Yeah,
likes of Moore, and there's a couple of others
the
in there.
principal point. Yeah,
Exactly, which really becomes symphonic because there's orchestras in there involved with them,
so is
and
that Prog.
Floyd is mixing in with them. Yeah. So that's where it gets to me. It's like, okay, you're getting psychedelic, you're getting prog, you're getting that mixture of blues in there as well. The other group, and again, no surprise here, that I struggle with when
Yeah.
I see the prog label is Rush.
Yeah.
Now, Rush started as that hard rock band in '74 with their self-titled Rush before Neil Peart came in. I think his lyrics, starting with Caress of Steel and Fly By Night onward, as they took on more of that literary tone with them, that steered them toward the whole storytelling slash concept, not a concept. We're going to talk about concept albums down the line too, by the way. Because Rush despite all of this, Rush only has one concept album fully.
Mm-hmm.
But you get into 2112, for example, sci-fi rock, hard rock elements in here, but definitely prog because side one tells a story. I think more appropriately tagged as prog rock albums from Rush come in with A Farewell to Kings from '77 and Hemispheres from 1978. For me, these are progressive rock albums because they do have the element of orchestration, but not through orchestration proper, but through keyboards that they had begun experimenting with. But more importantly, because of the lyrics of Neil Peart and just the far out storytelling sci-fi elements throughout each of those. So
as preparing for this show, and yes, everybody, we prepare for this. You just thought we just come in and just start blabbing. No, hours and hours of research go into this. But I was trying to think. So I wrote down, when I think of prog, what is prog to me? And I had long solos, I had long albums, I have fantasy lyrics. I put down crazy stage sets and concepts and lots of organ. I just kept Rick Wakeman just kept coming to my mind, and
yep.
and I thought I would really like Rick Wakeman when I was young, and then I bought a couple of his albums and found out I really don't. But but he had concepts and he had heavy orchestration and all that. But when you think of stage sets and stuff, early
Genesis topped a lot of lists too,
yeah,
especially in that transitional period between Gabriel and Collins.
Mm-hmm. And I don't like their. I have a great friend of mine, Bill from the Vinylverse, huge into prog. Genesis, the early stuff he worships. There's another channel out in San Francisco. It's Michael P. Dawson. That guy knows prog. Or Art, North Carolina vinyl picker. Gigantic prog fan. I mean, he has so much prog. His whole collection's prog. It's what he loves, and he knows everything about it. And I'm just going, what the heck is that? And when we were looking at those lists, these top prog albums, I would have to say 60, 70%. I have no idea.
Yep. Oh yeah, they get a little obscure. Genesis not so obscure, and they're up there.
Yeah. No.
I need to go back to your Oregon joke first. And the Wakeman stuff, I'm with you on there. Yes, I've got an extensive Yes collection. I don't have any solo Wakeman stuff, but I do have solo John Anderson albums. So, but I'd like to save the Andersons for our discussion on concept records or space.
Okay.
So we'll get to that. But on the subject of Oregon, I have got a prog rock album from my Michigan collection from a group called Whiz Kids. This was released in 1974, and these guys are from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm going to give this away, and when I show the back here, Steve. It centers around the use of a pipe organ.
No.
So, and it's interesting music. Obviously, it's Michigan, so it's in my collection. I'll go to it occasionally. It's not a tremendously valuable album, maybe in the $30 to $40 range in decent condition, but this has got okay. We've talked a lot about the early to mid to late '70s Michigan sound, that more acid rock sound and feel, the MC5 and the Stooges. Mix that sound with a pipe organ, and you get Whiz Kids. And
Well,
it's not like the pipe organ is tremendously prevalent. It's just in a lot of cases. So you're not like listening to a church.
still pipe
One
organ.
other Michigan one, and I've shown this a lot. This has made
Yeah.
it on a lot. But this is straight up tried and true, a Prog album in the stylings of Rush. MacArthur out of Saginaw, 1979 is this one. So you're really kind of fitting in some keyboards and that the longer songs and just the elements that you talked about come through in the MacArthur album for me as well. But
Sure.
that's a decent a couple examples of Michigan prog growing
Yeah.
out of the Michigan acid rock scene.
Yeah. There was Electric Light Orchestra. Now, I had their greatest hits. I just counted them as a pop band.
Yep.
That's what, or prog pop, but this was ranked as one of the best prog. Now, it's another MoFi. You notice all these progs they seem to have and MoFi. For a guy that says, I really don't like prog, I sure have a hell of a lot of MoFis of prog, but it does lend itself to this particular genre. But I go, really? This is prog? And I listened to it. Yes, they got a violin player, but I don't consider that, oh, well, that must be prog. Okay, well, I mean, Billy Strings it plays well, that's a fiddle, but it's fine.
It's a fiddle, but it's a stringed instrument,
Exactly.
right? Okay, we're stretching.
But as I listened to this, okay, all right, I could see what I definitely heard the prog leanings, and this was the other one that kind of had me. Yes, it's a it's a MoFi again.
A super trap.
That's a prog, but I hadn't thought of this being prog whatsoever. I mean, I bought it because it had Dreaming on here, and I love that single. And there was another one, Bloody Well Right.
Yep.
But again, it's kind of a concept. And when you listen to it, yeah, they do go on to more classical in here before they really went more pop, like with Breakfast in America and that. But I heard what they were talking about in this. And so
other bands of that era between ELO and Supertramp include the likes of Kansas as a prog group. And I can see that in some instances, but same thing as Supertramp, they kind of tend toward that rock side of it, the more pop. Yeah, Kansas, Point of No Return. Left Overture.
Left Overture is the big one. Yeah.
Yep.
Which I got to get back in. That's one I don't have back. I mean, I only need really 2 Kansas albums, this and that one. But I mean, I like the other stuff. It's fine. Just space, right?
Now, I have got a selection. I'm going to blow through these real quick if I could. Just some oddities that have popped up in my collection when I was looking at them that turn out to be prog albums, even though I don't really think they are.
Yeah.
And the other thing with this is some of these things, Steve, really lend themselves to being. I mean, they're valuable in that way. Just Discogs finds these things tremendously collectible. First up, we have one by the group Quatermass. These guys are out of the UK, I believe, trio from the UK. Mick Underwood played drums, who had played with Ritchie Blackmore in a band called the Outlaws. So Discogs calls this blues rock, art rock, symphonic rock, and then prog rock. So that kicks in there, but this is a little heavier. One of the other ones from that, I don't know if I can classify this specifically, is Can.
Yeah.
This is, Discogs calls it krautrock from 1972, and it's experimental music as well, but I would consider this to be almost progressive, but it's got more of a European instead of UK prog. It's more of a European flavor, where you're seeing the early leanings of what Kraftwerk would eventually become out of these guys.
Which I was reading, and some people consider krautrock a part of prog rock.
Yeah, and that's out there. This one I've had in the collection for a little while. It boggles the mind. I didn't know what to think of. The cover itself is the reason that let me zoom in on the cover here real quick. The cover itself is the reason that I first decided I'm going to check this one out a bit further. This is an artist named Jack Nietzsche. Jack Nietzsche, American arranger, producer, songwriter, Academy Award winning film score composer. He was in groups. Apparently, he was in Crazy Horse at one point. But this
Yeah, he
is
was.
an album called St. Giles Cripplegate from 1972. Discogs calls this contemporary classic rock, symphonic rock prog. And at first, I would classify this as a classical music album above and beyond, but because of the cover and because there's some guitar elements through there, it's like not quite classical. So I say that's almost prog.
Yeah.
Couple more. Where do we fall on Captain Beyond?
I used to have that, and it just didn't jump at me. I haven't ever brought that back in, but some consider that prog.
It's a space rock. Discogs goes so far even to call this heavy metal.
Yeah.
Which I don't. That's got the lenticular cover on it, by the way. Okay, a couple of other European oddities from my collection, and I'm going to not pronounce this correctly. Let me call this up so you can look at this while I'm doing this. This is Primitia Fornaria Marconi, or PFM, and the album is Photos of Ghosts from 1973. And Steve Discogs calls this prog rock, symphonic rock. And that's what it is. This, I think, mirrors Moody Blues in a way, but it's Italian. These guys are Italian. So maybe kind of a mixture between the mid-range Moody Blues and early Genesis is where I would put
Okay.
this one. PFM, odd stuff. And then finally, this one, I don't know how and why. I've just kind of kept this in my collection for a while. This is let me call this up here so I get it right. Trace is the name of the band. These guys are from, they're Dutch. Let's see. They're a Dutch band, and the album is considered jazz fusion prog rock, and the album is Birds, and it's out there. Final one. I don't know. Cover on this, the Dixie Dregs,
Yeah.
kind of sort of considered prog rock. This is a Night of the Living Dregs from 1979, I believe. Blues rock, country rock, and then prog. Can you mix blues and country rock with prog?
I guess. Yeah.
Apparently, the
I
Dregs
I
can.
heard that was one too. Yeah. You know,
So those are some more of the oddities from mine.
yeah, I don't have really oddities, but just ones, Alan Parsons. Of course, it's a MoFi.
Lo-fi, you've got
Yeah,
a
we
theme.
have to keep with that whole thing going. But I mean, I find this one very much. I could see that it's a concept album
Yep.
too, and I think most of his stuff was kind of concept albums.
Oh yeah, a few.
Here's one. This went really big, but would that be considered prog? What do you think?
Oh yeah.
Asia?
So okay, we're kind of taking the natural progression from yes in this case.
Yeah.
So does that connection make Asia Prague?
Some will say yes. That well,
Yeah,
we use yes a lot. Yeah, because you have Steve Hyland here, Jeffrey Downs, Carl Palmer. I mean,
yeah,
could it be?
it's a super
Uh,
group.
yeah, a lot do. Yeah, it's a super group of proggy guys.
Yep.
But here's a newer group, but someone sent me this Saga, very much
Okay.
prog oriented
Yep.
concept album. It's
Hmm.
aliens. Believe it or
Which
yeah.
Saga album is that? That is.
This is Saga. It is called Trust.
Okay.
And I guess you're going to trust these guys that not going to come down and suck your brain out. Modern, when you think modern concept or on Prague is Mars Volta. I mean,
Yes. Okay, that's a good example. Pretty much any of their stuff, but
yeah.
these psychedelic leanings, but very ethereal. How's
Yeah,
that?
ethereal, very out there, using different types of. I think maybe one part of Prague is chord changes. Using again the avant-garde jazz, or looking at different ways of doing this music that is not traditional, maybe. And again, I may be talking right out of my butt on this, because obviously we are not two guys that are experts in prog going on here,
No way,
but
shape, or form.
you
On
have
that
Mark.
note, though, on that note, let me
Yeah,
sneak this one in there because that's up there, I think, with Mars Volta, and this is Les Claypool and Sean Lennon and the Claypool Lennon Delirium, and this stuff. Okay, it's psychedelic rock, but such, I think, a prog feel with a couple of, there's two different Claypool Lennon collaboration albums, but South of Reality is, I think, the bigger one. Just it's got that feel for me on that. For that
yeah,
one's from 2019, so
yeah.
fairly modern prog.
Yeah. Newer one from Marillion. Again, someone sent this to me. I get a lot of prog albums sent in. People are really, they work to convert me, and I appreciate them to no extent. But I do. I would never have listened to Marillion, and I like this album. This is a more non-proggy Marillion, though. So it's prog light, and a lot of folks are very that's what they send me, prog light.
Prog
you
light to get you started.
yeah, and then I guess it can go into concepts, which we'll do later. But I just a lot of space rock, and I get in,
Yep.
and a space rock is set up as a concept. Oftentimes, is it prog or just concept album? I'll save those for a concept album one because
A concept album episode and or a space and sci-fi rock episode I see in our future.
yeah, I got space rock up the wazoo.
I had a couple of other ones here. I don't know. This showed up on a couple of lists, Radiohead
Hmm.
and primarily OK Computer. I don't know.
I don't know
That's a
either. I,
toughie
I
for me.
I never think of that as that. I just find it one that I can't listen to very well. So
But
I don't go
there's
well with
no
Radiohead.
shortage. There is no shortage if you look at lists out there. Like I said, most of the lists that I looked at as we were researching the stuff for today's episode had the likes of Yes up near the top, and Genesis up near the top, and Rush in some cases up in there,
Mhm.
and a lot of the bigger groups that we covered, the Moody Blues. But I think that the the connection, if you will, to other subgenres of that era being the late 60s, but especially the early to mid 70s. I think that was pretty much the heyday for progressive rock was the early 70s.
Yeah.
There's small baby steps that connect psychedelic rock to prog to symphonic to space to the concept albums. And I think that your little method of scoring them is this prog, I think is a great way to approach that.
Yeah. I find a true to me a prog album is about sitting down and listening. You're not going to dance. Now you're not going to, and I like to be able to get up and air guitar or dance or whatever. I could air violin or whatever, but it is about sitting to let the music come to you and for you to absorb the music. Now you're asking me to put on a very long album, just sit there. That's not an easy task to do. You could tie me down or whatever. And maybe that's my issue with prog. I'm not giving it the proper type of listening experience. A nice stereo system's great for prog, so you can pick up all the sounds that you want, or have a whole bunch of MoFis, I guess. I'm
Well,
so
it's a deeper, richer sound that comes with the orchestral involvement or the
it is,
orchestral themes.
and
Something
it's
that,
a big part of it. And
yeah,
and they said a lot of developed. Phil Spector really opened up the door for prog because of what he was doing with orchestration. Then the Beatles came out with Sergeant Pepper. Then Pet Sounds came out, and it was this all this stuff being done within the studio, but showing what orchestral music can do. That I think really got a lot of people excited about it.
the other important aspect I think of what you mentioned is that Prague, and I'll use Floyd as an example here. It could be either or maybe both in some cases, a passive listening experience. I'm doing some homework or writing something
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
housework, or an active listening experience where you physically sit in place. You hold the album cover up in front of you. You read the liner notes while you're absorbing the music. And I think that for prog rock, generally speaking, that is probably a more rewarding experience. You and I, you're retired now, and I'm not slowing down much yet either. But maybe that's the key to a greater enjoyment of prog rock, or at least in my case, the acceptance of saying, okay, Pink Floyd, Rush, yes, those are prog rock bands. Maybe that's the key to it, is getting back to the reason we started listening to vinyl in the first place, was to sit down, physically hold it, enjoy, read about it while we're listening to it, and fully absorb what they're presenting to us.
Yeah, Jim, I couldn't agree more with that. And to me, and again, those watching, please let us know, especially if you are prog lovers, what is it about? What excites you that, what are me and Jim missing? Okay.
Yeah.
But because I think that's just a great point, is it is about absorbing and just letting that music come to you. But your focus is on that music, and you're picking out now what's going on within it. You could say that with jazz music oftentimes,
Yeah.
what is happening in here in those solos, because it's something that no one's maybe done before. And rock, you have that 4/4 beat, 3/4 beat, you have that going on, and you can be up and dancing. In 3 minutes you're on to your next song. Totally different type of music.
It's tough to dance to a 7/16 time signature.
Oh my God!
Cases.
Yeah, nights of White Satin. You're just not pogoing to that sucker. That's that poetry comes on. You can't even slow dance to that freaking thing.
Too many time changes. And that's the case. It's not that, and I think you're probably going to be the same boat. It's not that, with the exception of you with a couple of albums, I think, but it's not that I dislike prog. It's just that maybe I'm not at a point where I can, like when I was younger, when I can take some more time to absorb this, because I've got a phone, I've got a tablet, I've got cataloging, I've got paperwork to do, all of that stuff. And I think maybe it would just behoove me to say, okay, and I can work on my time to knock down all of the records I need to listen to over the next 7 years.
Yeah.
It's too many, but to really take time and absorb these the way that they're meant to be.
Well, I will say, for the last 4 days, I've absorbed more prog than I've had in my whole life in one consolidated thing. Preparing, but just trying to question, why is it prog? What's going on with it? Which is kind of what the enjoyment of this is.
I don't believe that there is a Mo-Fi version of WizKids that I can get.
Thank God, though, man, because I'm sure I'd have it.
All right, folks. Well, you have been watching and or listening to two guys talking about records of Vinyl Community Podcast. As always, we would like to hear what you think, and as Steve said, kind of bring us up to speed on this. And is there a way that we could better respect? Is that a good word? Yeah. Better respect prog albums and artists.
I think so. That's good.
Okay. Head over to our Facebook page. Just search for that. You can comment on the Spotify episodes. I don't see many comments on Spotify, but I think the ability is there. Or you can obviously comment. And we're getting a few on the YouTube channel, which I still try to get to, and Steve is more diligent than I.
Try.
As we go. So next week, Steve, next week, I can say with a fair amount of confidence that we will have a Record Store Day Black Friday list to discuss.
All right.
I went back over, and for the past several years, the list has dropped typically in the last week of September or the first week of October. As of the recording of this, we are about as end of September as you can possibly get, save one day. So I would venture a guess that by midweek next week, we should see a Black Friday list. And I think that'll give us plenty to talk about next Sunday.
Well, I'm hoping they're dropping a lot of prog.
We'll see.
Now after this, I'm just ready to go, Jim. I am set.
All right, Steve. Well, you go finish up your prog, your leap prog leaps, leap into prog. How am I saying that? I can't even structure that.
That's a lot of prog here, man.
All right. Well, you have a good week, sir, and it's always great talking to you, Steve. Until next week, my name is Jim, and I am a record store owner.
And I'm Steve, a record collector.
And we're both trying harder with prog.
Yes, we are. We'll do better.
Have a good one, Steve. Talk to you later.
Bye.